All right, we have a lot more coming up with Julia Ainsley. But before we go to break, Steve Kornacki, we lost Ross Perot yesterday, passing away at the age of 89. Talk about his legacy and his impact on the elections.
I mean, I think Ross Perot really, he ushered in a new era of American politics, and the era of American politics that we're living in now, and that ultimately produced a generation on Donald Trump. I mean, Ross Perot in 1992, I think the historical significance of that election is, remember, that's the first post-Cold War presidential election. That's the first election after the fall of Soviet communism. I think there were new tensions and anxieties in the United States, sort of domestically, that were coming to the fore, that were going to define our politics. The media had evolved in a way that somebody like Ross Perot could emerge. Remember, he launched his campaign for president on cable news. There was one cable news outlet in 1992. There was no MS, there was no Fox News, but there was CNN. It was about a decade old.
Wow.
And at 9 p.m. on CNN every night, you had Larry King live. And one night, Larry King would have an old entertainer from Hollywood's glory days. The next night, he'd have a political figure, a business tycoon, whatever. February 92, Ross Perot is on there. 2 days earlier, George H.W. Bush, the sitting president, had he won the New Hampshire primary, but it was humbling. His opponent, Pat Buchanan, had got 40%. You had Bill Clinton. Paul Tsongas back then was making noise. And it was clear Bush was vulnerable. And Perot went on Larry King's show, and Larry King said to him, "Would you think about running for president?" And Perot said, "I'll tell you what, if you, the people, are serious about it, if you're that serious, you register my name in all 50 states, and I'll do it." And it was taken as sort of an empty promise, almost a non-answer. And yet, almost overnight, in an age before you had the internet, like we have it today, we didn't have a viral culture back then, a grassroots movement really did spring up. And it was with about 8 weeks after that, they handed in 250,000 signatures in the state of Texas to get Ross Perot on the ballot there. He led a march through the streets of Austin. By the late spring of '92, he was running in first place in the national polls, ahead of Bush, ahead of Clinton. There was serious talk that he could actually win the presidency, that he could actually win the Electoral College. Of course, as the scrutiny intensified, things changed a little bit for Perot. But yeah, I think there were a lot of precursors there in that Perot 92 race with what ended up happening with Trump a generation later.
You know, Susan Page, it's interesting. We think about all the years that changed politics. A lot of people obviously look back at 1966 for the beginning of the Reagan Revolution, 1974, the Watergate babies, as they were called. You can go through the years, but 1992, specifically that month that Steve Kornacki just talked about, 1992, a turning point in American politics. It really defines this era. Ross Perot, of course, launching his bid on Larry King, and also Pat Buchanan humbling George H.W. Bush. When I ran 2 years later, I found there was far more energy at the United We Stand meetings, which was Perot's group, than there was even with the Republican Party. Most of the people that worked on my first campaign, a long shot campaign, were Perot United We Stand people. And I found out very quickly that the party of George H.W. Bush was no longer the party of Bush. It was this amalgamation of Perot and Buchanan, and I think it still is.
You know, it's so interesting. I covered that 1992 race for Newsday, and here's another lesson among the others that Steve mentioned from that apply today and applied to Trump's surprise win in 2016. I don't think we took Perot seriously enough as a credible candidate in 1992. It took a while for, I think, the news media to understand that it was conceivable he could win, unlikely, but conceivable. He led for a while, I think, in June of 1992, but that he represented something important that we needed to pay attention to. And I do think that it started a lot of the politics we see unfolding today, the populism, the concern about trade, the dissatisfaction and suspicion of the Washington establishment. It wasn't new, but it got a lot more intense with Ross Perot. And even though he was an unlikely character, he was a pretty eccentric guy. He managed to tap it in a way that really, in a way, should have told us a lot about the coming days of Donald Trump.
So, Steve, Perot got 19% in 1992. President George H.W. Bush and the Bush family, as Susan can tell you, have long contended that Ross Perot cost George Bush a second term. Do the facts, do the numbers bear that out?
They don't, and I mean, you can look at it a couple different ways. There was incredible personal animosity between the Bushes and Perot, so there was a whole backstory there. The exit poll on Election Day asked Perot voters, if Perot wasn't on the ballot, who would you choose? The exact same number chose Bush as Clinton. You also had a real-time sort of experiment in the '92 campaign because from the middle of July until the start of October, Perot wasn't in the race. He actually ran in the spring, backed out, came back in. So you saw polling for a Bush-Clinton race for 10 weeks, and there wasn't a single poll in that time, including the day after the Republican convention when Bush led Bill Clinton. Clinton generally led by double digits over Bush when it was a head-to-head race. And when I mentioned Perot getting in February '92, or at least going on Larry King in February '92, remember that George H.W. Bush was already severely weakened before anybody mentioned the name Ross Perot. His approval rating was down in the 30s. As we said, Buchanan got nearly 40% in the New Hampshire primary. The economy was in a very bad place in 1992, and there were there was a lot of Buchanan sort of disaffection on the right that Perot tapped into. We forget. There was stuff going on the left that he tapped into in '92 as well. Jerry Brown in '92 ran kind of a guerrilla campaign. Perot tapped into that. And Paul Tsongas on the deficit, which was Perot's signature issue in '92. There were Tsongas voters, Brown voters, Buchanan voters. There were a lot of voters in that pro-'92 coalition.
All right, still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to have the new NBC News reporting about migrant children describing misconduct by border agents in Arizona. Plus, President Trump tweeted last night that Democrats are coming after Mitch McConnell. We'll show you what the Senate Majority Leader is saying about the retired Marine fighter pilot, Amy McGrath's new bid to unseat him. Morning Joe is back in a moment.
You have said that part of your $40 billion deficit
I have also told your program
is $180 billion.
Yes, may I finish?
May I finish? It was a simple question.
Well, you've already finished.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.